For this third week in Lent, we're going to be looking at a challenging but very important passage of Scripture from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 to 25, which is sometimes known for a particular word which has made its way into my title, and I'm calling my talk for today, Confronting the Scandalon. In a previous community in which we live, the local pastors association decided that it would be instructive for our monthly meetings to begin with pastors taking turns giving a brief inspirational talk highlighting the key theological distinctive of their particular Christian denomination. For my part, when it was my turn, I probably talked of how Mennonites attempt to follow the teachings of Jesus with particular emphasis on the Sermon on the Mount. But I'll never forget the conviction of a Lutheran pastor who declared that the cross of Christ was the center of Lutheran theology and worship. According to my memory, no other pastor talked about the cross as the focal point of their denomination's theology, certainly not with his intensity. That seems surprising because the cross is visually represented in most, if not all, churches. Very often, though, if we are honest, it's treated more as a decorative symbol rather than a reality around which we develop our theological beliefs. There was a time in my early adulthood, for instance, when I wore a cross on a chain around my neck. But truthfully, I regarded it more as an attractive item of jewelry rather than as something with serious theological significance. I'm going to say something that may sound a little harsh, but I think if you follow with me as we look at today's scripture, we have to confess it's true. Here it is. As much as we say the cross of Christ is important to us, in practice we often relegate the cross to some back corner of our faith because we much rather want to celebrate the excitement of resurrection and new life. That aversion to the cross is illustrated in Lent, where we can't wait to get past Good Friday so that we can celebrate the resurrection. I can't remember if my Lutheran friend used the scripture reading that we look at today, but he may have. Just a quick comment before I read these words written by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. Just in case we are afraid Paul's words were racist. The Jews and the Greeks represented the two dominant cultures among which Paul circulated. Jewish culture placed high value in signs. Think Moses and the 10 plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. Signs were an indication of the power with which Moses acted. Greeks, of course, are remembered for their philosophers. And these two cultures illustrate the human desire to gain either power or wisdom from religion. And so with that in mind, here is today's scripture, again from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, here's a quotation from Isaiah chapter 29, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Good quote. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs, and Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. According to these words, my Lutheran colleague had the support of the Apostle Paul. No matter how often I read or hear Paul's statement, it jolts my inner being. But we preach Christ crucified. No wonder Paul said his words are a stumbling block and foolishness, because I desperately wish he would rather have said, but we preach Christ resurrected. The resurrection is glorious and promises a vibrant future. The crucifixion, on the other hand, is dark and depressing. We relate to Jesus' 11 remaining disciples who hid in discouragement immediately following the crucifixion. The tradition from which I come went as far as to proudly state that we didn't leave Jesus on the cross. And yet, rather than declaring that the resurrection revealed the power of God, these words tell us that the crucifixion was the power and wisdom of God. Way to go, Lutherans. As an aside, a rewarding part of being in ministry has been the opportunity to interact with clergy from other denominations and to learn from their different perspectives. The scripture reading began with a quotation from Isaiah 29:14, where God said, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Paul used that quotation from Isaiah to highlight the fact that the cross proves that God's thinking is not man's thinking. Just a couple of lines later, in that same Isaiah passage, Isaiah recorded God chastising his people with these words: you turn things upside down as if the potter were thought to be like the clay. Good quote, too, from Isaiah 29:16. A basic principle of interaction with God is knowing that our thinking is upside down to God's thinking. Here's where we have to be careful. If we boldly claim to not struggle with the concept of the cross of Christ, we haven't given it serious thought, because the cross will always be upside down to human thinking. It's no surprise then that today's scripture calls the cross a stumbling block to our human inclinations. Stumbling block is a translation of a powerfully graphic Greek word which has made its way into our English language. Scandalon. Just like today's scandals, a scandalon can stop us short. And if we are honest, we have to admit that the cross is scandalous to us too. So here are some scandalons over which we can trip before we embrace the reality of the cross for ourselves. Scandalon 1. Embracing the cross as central to our lives means recognizing that we owe a debt of gratitude. We owe that debt first to God, but also to others. Now, gratitude doesn't sound so bad until we understand that the cross strips us of our pride of accomplishment. We end up having to admit that there is really nothing in my life for which I can claim solo credit. There is no such thing as a self-made person in God's kingdom. We like to pride ourselves on our accomplishments, but the cross means that we are forever indebted to God. As the letter to the Colossians puts it, God forgave us, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. That's Colossians 2:14. Having our legal indebtedness canceled means that the cross forever stands as a symbol of the debt of gratitude we owe to God, which also robs us of our own pride of accomplishment. Just as important, we owe a debt of gratitude to others. None of us have gotten where we are without others. For instance, Romans 9:8 says, "Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another." Maybe that's why the whole last chapter of Romans, that's Romans 16, that whole chapter is a tribute to the people who helped the Apostle Paul along the way, including some who risked their lives for him. The cross reminds us that we have a debt of gratitude, not only to God, but also to others. A Scandalon. Scandalon 2. Embracing the cross means taking responsibility for the injustice I inflict on the world. It's what the Bible calls sin. We can convince ourselves that we are behaving well until we confront the cross. The cross removes any self-delusion that we are essentially good. In fact, the longer we focus on the cross, the more aware we become of ways in which we have damaged our relationships with God, with others, and even with ourselves. Because as we allow the reality of the cross to penetrate our souls, we expose the shame that hides within, blocking us from accessing the cleansing nature of the cross. Because allowing the cross to expose our failures is too painful, we are much more likely to look for people and institutions to blame for those personal injustices that we inflict. We can blame our families, our job, the government, and even the church for the failures in our lives. But the cross uncomfortably forces us to face our own accountability before we can experience freedom from our failures. A Scandalon. Scandalon number 3. Embracing the cross means that I have a responsibility for others. The cross is not just about us personally. Jesus was not on the cross because of himself, but because of his love for others. The cross also calls us to care for others. More than a one-time encounter, the cross is a mission to which we are called. The connection between that mission and the cross was hinted at in Jesus' first sermon. Luke 4 chronicles Jesus' first recorded sermon where he read these words from Isaiah 61 in the synagogue at Nazareth. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. According to Luke, when Jesus claimed to be the fulfillment of these words, the religious leaders wanted to kill him, but he escaped. It's shocking to consider that the cross came about as a result of Jesus' mission to bring restoration to people's lives. And it's that mission of restoration to which Jesus called his followers when he told them to pick up their cross daily. The cross is a call for us to look out for others. It's a scandalon. Well, these are three scandalons, three stumbling blocks that highlight the powerful nature of the cross. Recognizing our debt of gratitude, taking responsibility for the injustices we inflict, and taking responsibility for others, looking out for others. When we reflect carefully on the cross, we can never again treat the cross only as a means of being able to celebrate the resurrection. The cross is God's power and wisdom at work, securing our restoration.